This HOA board meeting to order. Please stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Can anybody hear me? Everybody? All right, Mark's got me. That's good. All right. We have a special open session tonight. The reason we have this meeting is because last Wednesday in the open session we approved a change in the earlier discussed budget to move the HOA fees, monthly HOA fees, from $240 to $245. What that did was that, and we approved that to move it to the operating part of the budget. What that did was it added approximately $200,000 to operating, and we cannot just move it to operating, we have to move it to a specific line item. So that is the reason we're here tonight, because we have to do that in open session. So, at this time, do I have a motion so that we can have discussion on moving that $200,000? John's not going to go on that. Okay. I'm going to make the motion to move the roughly $200,000 to the line item for third-party contracts related to maintenance of the golf course and common area. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Discussion. Dan. Yeah. Yep. Oh, we only one? Hold it down. There we go.
Doug promised me I could have time tonight for the time I didn't get last week, but I'll still keep it short. I went back and watched the tape session of last week's meeting, and I noticed that there was a recurring theme. And basically, it was that we had moved a lot of money out of prior year surplus into reserves, and that we had no money left to cover emergencies, and that we could not give the $5 in the assessment reduction to the homeowners because that would cover our emergencies. According to our CC&Rs, in page 40, it talks about the three options that we have to use prior year surplus. One of them is not an emergency fund. The three options are refund it to the homeowners, reduce the assessment for the following year, or put it in reserves. Everything that the board did last year in moving money from prior year surplus was in accordance with our CC&Rs. We mitigated the assessment. We put $23,669 from prior year surplus into the income line on the income statement. That comes out to $284,000 out of the prior year surplus. We moved $865,000 into reserves from the prior year surplus. We gave a $50 rebate, a one-time rebate, to the homeowners last year. It cost us $166,000. There was some concern that as we do the $23,669 for the balance of the year, that we'll be in a negative position. The people that told you that really don't know what they're talking about. We have $350,000 sitting in prior year surplus that we set aside for the legal issue with the water and City of Banning. That's been resolved, and we anticipate we'll have $237,000 after we pay the bill to the City of Banning left in prior year surplus. We can take whatever we need from that fund, that amount, to cover the $23,669 every month. So we will not, let me repeat that, we will not be in a negative position at the end of the year. Now, if we want to talk about emergencies, which was a lot of concern about, we have a line on the second line on the balance sheet. It's called invested operating. Every board member that's currently on the board knows it's there, and every prior board member knows it's there. One of the first things that I learned when I became a board member last year, when we set up the guidance to PCM on what we wanted in the budget, was that we were going to keep that invested operating at that level or more. When I first found the invested operating, back when I was on the Finance Advisory Committee, it was below $800,000. With the interest, it's now accumulated to $815,000. We have never touched that money. Now, in terms of using prior year surplus to offset any kind of emergency that we have, that violates our CC&Rs. You know, what do we do when we have people that violate our CC&Rs? We send them a do better letter, and we warn them, if you do it again, we're going to fine you. So how many board members are we going to fine for not following the CC&Rs? Last year, we started off the year with $1.46 million in prior year surplus. And every year prior to last year, from 2013 on, we gave money back in a mitigation of the assessment process. In 2013, we gave back the equivalent of $5 per month. It was right around $180,000. In 2014, we gave back $2.50 per month. In 2015, we gave back $4.35 per month. And this year, we gave back $7.12 per month. So taking money out of prior year surplus for mitigating the assessment is not something new. We've always done it. The problem that we have is we increase the assessment every year, or almost every year, and then we wound up with a surplus that grows and grows and grows. At the end of 2009, we had increased the assessment that year by $15, and that generated an additional $598,000 of income to the HOA. At the end of that year, we had a $515,000 surplus. And it's grown since then to, at the end of 2014, it was $914,000. Last year, at the end of 2015, it was $1.4 million. That's your money. Now, if we'd followed one of the rules and says refund it to the homeowners, that could have been $438 back in your pockets in a one-time good deal. And guess what? We still would have been okay this year. We're running a surplus here. Right now, the operating surplus is anywhere between $350,000 to $450,000, which means we're going to have a prior year surplus on January 2nd of next year. We cannot use that for emergencies. Let's talk about what we can use for emergencies. We have that $800,000 sitting and invested at operating. We assume it's for emergencies, but we don't have an accounting dictionary, so we can tell exactly what it is. So maybe the board members aren't familiar with what that $815,000 is. We have $9 million worth of insurance on our $21 million facility. We have some deductibles, but we do have the $9 million worth of insurance. We have almost $9 million in our reserves for repair and replacement. So between the two, that's $18 million if we had to replace the whole thing all at one time. In addition, prior boards have set up what they call a contingency fund in the reserves for $415,000. So I don't think there's anybody here that can say that the boards in total over the years have set up a situation where we don't have money to cover an emergency. George Moyer mentioned last week that he was concerned about the fact that we had to replace the HVAC. That was covered under repairs, under the reserve program. We have line items set up in the reserves for almost every item that we have right now in the property. Okay, and if you go and look at year zero in the reserve study, there's at least 3 items for HVAC for the main clubhouse, 2 or 3 for the north, and 2 or 3 for the south. So we're not going to have any problems handling an emergency. If, in fact, the whole facility is leveled through an earthquake or something like that, we're not going to be worried about rebuilding the clubhouse. We're going to be worried about all the residents surviving. We're covered for emergencies. We cannot use, and I can't emphasize this too much, we cannot use prior year surplus for operations according to our CC&Rs. If you want to amend the CC&Rs, then you need to go in and look what it calls for in the CC&Rs in terms of the amendment. It's a very strict, I can't remember if it's 67% of the vote or 75% of the vote. So I don't think that we really have a problem with an emergency. The people that talk about all the things that we have to do in terms of maybe we're going to do tree trimming, maybe we're going to do new golf cart paths, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. We had 16 meetings for the budget process this year. We had at least 4 open sessions. At no time during any of those open sessions did anything like that come up. So I think I would recommend right now that we retain the $5 reduction in the assessment. Thank you. Jim.
The motion that is presently on the floor is to take the $200,000 represented by the $5 dues increase back to $245 into a fund, into the line item for repair of the golf course. The intention for moving the dues back to $245 is to increase our reserves. The intention is not to spend that money. The only way you get more cash, which is what the objective of that motion is to take it in and not spend it on the golf course. If you spend it, it's not there. So to put it in a line item of expense and then tell management not to spend it is very, very questionable in my mind as an operating philosophy. I happen to agree with Dan. I think we have adequately, more than adequately, covered our reserves. This community is the gold standard of communities in terms of financial preparedness. We have reserves that are above 80%. That puts us in the top 1% or higher in terms of HOA communities across the country. I think I, for one, am going to vote against that motion because I think we spent, as a board, 6 months in hearings, public and private discussions, discussing this budget and putting this budget together. Our staff has spent 8 months putting that together. We've had public meetings in essentially every month since May, explaining the budget, and at the last minute to change it, after everyone had agreed to it, seems to me highly inappropriate. I think the budget as was originally presented is an appropriate budget for our community. We are a safe community, we are a cost-effective community, and the money is yours. It's not the board's, it's your money, and you ought to keep it in your pocket, not the board's. Thank you.
May I? Yes. I hate to ask, can you hear me all? Good, okay. The first thing I would like to do is read the CC&Rs. Just a portion of them. At the end of any fiscal year of the association, the board may determine that all X funds remaining in the operating fund over and above the amounts used for operation of the association properties may be returned to the members proportionately or may be retained by the association in the reserve fund or used to reduce the following year's regular assessment. There's nowhere in my mind that dictates that, and based on the investigation that we conducted, dealing with the people whom we have confidence in, they've indicated that the funds that are in the prior year's surplus could be used other than what is being indicated here tonight. And that's what we did. Just going down a couple of notes I made, we talked about the investing operating funds as a source for emergency, because we have not needed to use that. Well, guess what, folks? We haven't had to use our earthquake fund either. Do we get rid of our earthquake insurance? I don't think we do. The surplus has grown every year. That sounds good, but then you need to really look at what were the circumstances that generate the surplus. And for those of us who go into it and have a reasonably objective look at it, we understand that this is not a function of the board overestimating. We had a series of relatively fortunate and unique instances that generated that surplus. I mean, one year, we, back 2015, as I recall, our irrigation expenses were $330,000 under what we had expected. If we had suggested that in the original budget, we would have been told we were crazy. But the golf course people, and presumably the weather, because that usually enters into it, came through. We were able to sell a house, which was hung up on legal things. So my point is, we are not deliberately budgeting for over surplus. We're a nonprofit. We'd like to end up on the plus side, but we don't try and generate a large surplus every year. So, to my mind, going back to what I said at the last meeting, it's relatively simple. The way that this reduction in the assessment came about, if you look at the budget documents, on draft 2, we had X number of dollars in there for reserve expense next year. You look at draft 3, which was $10 a month less, okay? And you see, whoa, we were able to reduce our reserve expense for next year by $10. How did we do that? We took the money and we applied it to next year's expenses. So we didn't have to put in that much money next year. In other words, I go back to my phrase, from my point of view, it was done with smoke and mirrors, because you do not, in my mind, if you're going to, everybody wants the dues to go down. I don't have a problem with that. But in my mind, if you're going to reduce the dues, it has to be based on the fact you have been able to reduce your operating expenses or increase your revenue. Everything else is going to lead you into trouble. Thank you.
Sandy?
Okay, let me tell you my perspective on this and why I voted the way I did. First off, the board is not up here to take your money, it's our money too. We're up here to do a fiduciary good job, and I think we're doing that. Why I voted was, one, we're going to be keeping your HOAs the same. They're not going up. Secondly, you are going to get money back. Once we get the final from the auditors at the end of the year, you will get a rebate. Then the others, the reserves now are at a great spot to be. So we won't be able to determine until the first of the year how much you'll get back. Some will go in the reserves and some can go into that operating budget. The attorney, our auditors, and the CAI, which is the California Association Institute National, have all said it's prudent for HOAs to have at least $1 to $2 million in your operating budget. By doing what we voted on, that's going to happen. And your HOAs are not going up, you're going to get your refund, and our reserves are going to stay up there. And that's why I voted the way I did, and I still believe in that.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, we have 4 opinions up to this point. I agreed all the way along that the 240 was a fine number. But over the last, and we talked about a lot, we went to a lot of meetings. Dan, everybody was correct. This is a long, drawn-out process. But over the last, since we had our last budget meeting, I've been going around this development, and I've seen things that were not taken care of. And because of that, they were not budgeted. For that, I talked to a couple of people, and they said, well, we decided that we weren't going to put that in the budget because we just didn't feel that we could afford it this year. There are some things out there that really need to be taken care of. I'm not going to get into specifics because it divides it up into a lot of different pieces. But because of that, not having any idea how much those cost, I happened to encounter another situation that was being taken care of, and I did see how much that particular entity cost. And putting that against what we had put away for this particular item, I figured that $200,000 was going to be well used to maintain this facility and the HOA common grounds in the fashion that everybody here seems to want, and we want likewise. So there is the reason why I changed back. Like Sandy said, I still firmly agree with the fact that we need a rebate, and we know we're going to have at least one. We could have a bigger one, or we could have 2. We don't know what that is right now because we don't know exactly what the monies are come the end of the year. But as soon as we get that, excluding, of course, the money we have left over from the water, which we know, and we know we have that available. Once we've determined that, we can make another determination as to how we want to allocate those funds. But I still agree that that's a good place is the rebate. So that's where I'm at. Dan's got another.
Last week, there was a great deal of concern about how we're going to handle emergencies. We haven't heard anything from anybody tonight, except me, how we're going to handle emergencies. The $200,000 represents, over the course of a year, 0.02% of our annual budget. I don't think 0.02% is really going to take care of a major emergency. The point that I'm trying to make is that we have had consistent, I just happen to have the numbers here. We've had consistent increases in the surplus. In 2012, it was $623,000. 2013, it actually went down by $23,000, but it still was $600,000. 2014, it was $814,000. 2015, it was $980,000. And last year, like I mentioned earlier, it was $1.46 million. In 2010, we increased the revenue, like I mentioned before, by increased the assessment by $15. That generated an extra $598,000. In 2011, we raised it by $2. It was $80,000. We didn't increase the assessment in 2012 and 2013. 14, 15, and 16, it went up by 10, 6, and 9 respectively, generating $399,000, $239,000, and $359,000 in terms of surpluses. All those overages, if you will, contributed to that 1.46. Remember that while those surpluses were increasing, we were still giving money back through the assessment mitigation. And when I talked about how much it was, we're talking about an average of about $150,000 to $200,000 a year that we used for assessment mitigation. If we didn't do that, that surplus over the last 4 years would be another $800,000 higher. Could have been $2.2 million at the beginning of this year. So we're building in a surplus every time we take that assessment mitigation money out of prior year's surplus and throw it into the income line on the income statement. If we're going to handle emergencies, okay, let's be honest about it. We've got the funds to cover it. There's probably going to be, if we have a major earthquake, we've got insurance to cover that. We got a 25% deductible, but we still got 20 or 75% of that $9 million to handle earthquake. Things that aren't covered by the insurance, we could handle under the reserve program, the repair and replace. If we have to do the additional things that Doug is saying, then I propose an alternate solution. I believe that we owe the homeowners the $10 assessment or the $9 assessment increase they had last year. I believe we owe them back because what we assessed last year we did not need. we generated $359,000. That's $10. That's almost $10 a person that we didn't need. Now, I understand somebody's going to say, well, we had the Wailea house, okay, one-time good deal. But if we hadn't taken the assessment mitigation out of prior year surplus and plunked that against the income line, we still would have had about a $250,000 to $300,000 surplus. So we're not doing bad on the operations side, but we can't use that money to handle emergencies. And taking the $200,000 that we're going to do now and put it against all of these other, we'll call them improvement projects in the existing budget items, what I propose is reduce the assessment for the current assessment for the reserves, which is I think $38 a month per homeowner, reduce it down to 33. We're pretty close to 83 or 84% funded in our reserves right now. And if we take the surplus that we're going to have next year, along with the $200,000 that we've got left over from the city water issue, that'll give us almost $600,000. So let's assume that next year we can give a rebate of $5 in addition to the rebate this year. That pays the homeowners back the $9 they got assessed last year that they didn't need. Plus, it gives us a minimum of $400,000 to put into reserves, and it'll get us up to about 85% funded against a theoretically ideal funded balance. So if we're going to keep the assessment, if we want to keep the $200,000 in those line items for, as you mentioned, Doug, because things that need to be done, keep them in there, but give the homeowners the $5 back and reduce the contribution to the reserves. Thank you.
Got one from the floor first, Jim. Go ahead.
Kevin Wolfswinkel, 1958 Fairway Oaks Avenue, 11-year resident of Sun Lakes. It's pay me now or pay me later, and basically what I'm hearing here is that we're going to get to 83%. In 2012, we were at 83%, so we're just getting back to where we were in the past. It bothers me that when you say, well, we have all the money and we're in great shape and so on and so on. We are. We're financially very, very well. But at the same time, when I hear it's our money, give it back to me. Excuse me, I plan on being here for another 10 years. Some people are only going to be here for 2 years, and some of our friends died yesterday. But the bottom line is the responsibility of the board is to maintain and improve those statements, maintain and improve our property. It's not about giving money back to the homeowners because it's your money. It's my money too. So you have to think about it in terms of what are you going to do to maintain and improve the property long term, not short term. It's as simple as that. And as far as saying, you know, this is not legal, or it's John pointed that out, I would ask Chris, our general manager, who's a CPA, not a government auditor, if it's illegal for us to do what has been done in the past. That's all.
Jim?
Louder.
You didn't have it on.
Doug indicated that he felt that since the budget was finalized, he's been looking around and finding things that weren't done. And so it's one of the reasons that he voted to increase the dues by $5 to create a $200,000 fund. If the things that he noticed are in the reserves are there to repair things that we have that need to be repaired. That's the purpose of the reserves. If he noticed things that happen not to be in reserves that need to be repaired, we have an account called a capital improvement fund. It has $2,245,000 in it, right? Or excuse me, $1,245,000 in it. And that is for the improvement to physical assets on the property that aren't in reserves. So the money is there to repair those things that need repairing. We are a fiscally sound community that has the money, and this board tries to identify those things that need to be fixed and fix them promptly. And we have the money to do so. I reiterate my stance that the dues can safely and soundly be reduced from 245 to 240. Thank you.
I wouldn't put Chris on the spot on this.
It's not his job
Yeah,
to
yeah.
sit here.
Thank you. I'm somewhat puzzled, and perhaps I shouldn't bring this up, but at the last meeting, the change was approved for ZIP.
For what?
For no change.
No change.
No, that's not true.
Yes, it was.
What he said was that the last board meeting, last Wednesday, the motion was made and carried 4-0 to retain the homeowners association dues at $245.
It was 3-1.
Are you sure?
Yes.
Because I heard you say.
No.
Okay, I was surprised, I'm sorry. It's okay,
A
it was all
number
right.
of us heard you.
It was 3-1, excuse me, I thought, he was sitting right here, and I swore I heard him
He thought
say
it
it.
was me.
Yeah.
Apparently, a number of us thought Jim had voted for it.
He said aye against. I remember.
Doesn't matter, it's a moot point. That's what John was trying to say. And what it was, as I alluded to at the very beginning of the meeting, is that we allocated the funds to operating, and we can't just put it in operating, we have to put it in a specific line item. And that's what the motion is right at this point in time.
One more thing. By putting the $200,000 into currently established line items in the budget, when we set the budget up, we all agreed that the operating budget was adequate for our needs. Okay, it wasn't a Cadillac plan, but by the same token, it wasn't a beater plan. It was adequate. Now what we're saying is we're going to give more money to those particular areas in the operating budget than they have people or hours to do the job. If they can absorb another $200,000 worth of work without any more hours or any more people, then they had a lot of people sitting around doing nothing. So I think that what we're going to do is we're going to end up having a $200,000 surplus if we can't do the work in-house, or we're going to have to contract it out just to spend the $200,000.
Much of the work is contracted out. When you think of things like tree trimming and concrete repair, it is contracted out, so it doesn't really increase the load, manpower load.
I call for the question.
The vote.
Okay, the vote.
All right, the motion is to move the $200,000 to third-party contracts related to maintenance of the golf course and common areas, which is all of the Sun Lakes outside of your properties. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Opposed.
3-2, motion carries. And that is the only item on the agenda, so the meeting's adjourned.